The morning sun of Serenova Prime cast long shadows across the crystal towers of Zenith Galactic Academy. Students from dozens of worlds walked through the peaceful gardens, their different forms creating a colorful parade of galactic diversity. Some floated, others crawled, and a few simply glowed as they moved between classes. Jake Morrison adjusted his backpack and checked his schedule tablet. He was still getting used to the strange symbols that marked his classroom assignments. Being one of only 3 humans at the academy made everything feel more complicated. Other students would stare at him when they thought he wasn't looking, then quickly turn away when he made eye contact. He couldn't blame them. Humans had only joined the Galactic Federation 6 months ago, and their reputation had arrived long before they did. Earth was classified as a Class 7 death world, which meant most species considered it barely habitable. The fact that humans had not just survived there, but thrived, made them objects of curiosity and fear. The hallways of the academy were designed to accommodate every type of being imaginable. Pools of water ran alongside the walkways for aquatic species, while heating lamps provided warmth for cold-blooded students. The walls themselves were living coral that filtered the air and provided a soft, natural light. Jake found his classroom and stepped inside. The room was circular, with seats arranged in ascending rows that curve around a central teaching area. Students were already settling into their preferred spots, and Jake noticed a familiar pattern of empty seats forming around wherever he chose to sit. He picked a spot in the back row, hoping to draw less attention. As other students filed in, he recognized most of them from his previous classes. There was Zara, a Verdani whose plant-like skin shifted from green to blue, depending on her mood. Near the front sat 3 Kairati students, their insect-like bodies clicking softly as they organized their study materials. The aquatic cetaceans had positioned themselves near the water channels, their sleek forms partially submerged. Professor Kethril entered the room with the quiet dignity that marked his species. The Altarian's crystalline features caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. His age was impossible to determine, but his reputation for wisdom was known throughout the galaxy. He had been teaching at the academy for over 2 centuries. "Welcome, students, to Advanced Predator Psychology," Professor Kethril began, his voice carrying easily through the room without amplification. "Today we begin a new chapter in your understanding of galactic diversity. Not all species in our galaxy are as peaceful as those represented in this classroom." Jake noticed several students shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The Verdani students had turned a darker shade of green, while the Kairati made soft chirping sounds that had learned indicated anxiety. "Fear is a natural response," the professor continued, seemingly reading the room's mood. "But fear without understanding leads to prejudice and conflict. Our goal in this course is to study predatory species in a controlled environment, to understand their psychology and behavior patterns." He activated a holographic display that showed various species from across the galaxy. Some looked relatively harmless, while others appeared to be living nightmares of claws, teeth, and armor plating. Predators serve important ecological functions, Professor Kethril explained. They control population growth, eliminate weak or sick individuals, and drive evolutionary adaptation. However, when removed from their natural environments, predatory instincts can become problematic. Jake found himself genuinely interested in the subject. On Earth, humans had studied predators for centuries, though usually while trying to avoid being eaten by them. Lions, tigers, sharks, bears. Earth had produced an incredible variety of creatures designed to kill and consume other life forms. "Tomorrow," the professor announced, "we will have a very special guest. The Galactic Council has approved the transport of a Saurian hunter from Predathos Prime. This will be a controlled demonstration, with full safety protocols in place." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several students made distressed sounds, while others began frantically tapping on their tablets, presumably looking up information about Saurians. Jake pulled out his own device and did a quick search. What he found was impressive. Saurians were apex predators standing up to 8 feet tall, with enhanced senses, razor-sharp claws, and hunting instincts refined over millions of years of evolution. They were territorial, aggressive, and considered among the most dangerous species in known space. "I understand your concern," Professor Kethril said, raising his hand for quiet. "But this presentation has been approved by the Academy Safety Committee. The specimen will be fully restrained and accompanied by trained handlers. You will observe from a safe distance while learning about predatory behavior firsthand. Jake looked around the classroom at his fellow students. Most appeared terrified at the prospect of sharing space with a creature designed to kill. Some were already calculating the distance to the exits, while others seemed to be considering dropping the course entirely. He found their reaction puzzling. Sure, saurians sounded dangerous, but they were just another predator species. Earth had produced thousands of predatory species over its history. Humans had learned to coexist with them, hunt them, and in many cases, domesticate them. As class ended and students filed out in small, nervous groups, Jake remained in his seat for a moment. He was actually looking forward to tomorrow's demonstration. It would be interesting to see how a predator from another world compared to those he had grown up learning about. He gathered his materials and headed for his next class, unaware that his calm reaction to the announcement had been noted by both Professor Kethril and several of his classmates. While others planned to skip tomorrow's class or request alternative assignments, Jake Morrison was simply curious to meet another predator. After all, how dangerous could one saurian be? The next morning brought an unusual tension to the academy. Word had spread about the predator demonstration, and many students had chosen to skip their morning classes. Those who remained moved through the hallways in tight groups, speaking in hushed voices about the saurian that was coming to their peaceful school. Jake noticed the difference immediately. The normally cheerful atmosphere felt heavy with worry. Even the living coral walls seemed dimmer, responding to the collective anxiety of the students passing through the corridors. Security guards were more visible than usual, their presence meant to reassure, but somehow making everything feel more dangerous. He arrived at Professor Kethril's classroom to find only half the usual number of students. Many seats sat empty, particularly in the front rows. Those who had come clustered together near the exits, as far from the center of the room as possible. The Verdani students had turned an unhealthy shade of yellow, while the Kairati made constant nervous clicking sounds with their mandibles. I appreciate those of you who chose to attend today's lesson, Professor Kethril began. His crystalline features reflected the worry in the room. I want to assure you that every safety measure has been taken. The specimen will remain contained at all times. As if summoned by his words, a deep rumbling sound echoed through the building. The students froze, recognizing the sound of heavy transport vehicles approaching the academy. Through the large windows, they could see a convoy of armored vehicles pulling up to the main entrance. The first vehicle was unlike anything most students had ever seen. It was built like a fortress on wheels, with thick armor plating and energy shields that shimmered in the morning light. Behind it came two more vehicles filled with galactic peacekeepers in full combat gear. Their weapons were clearly visible, and their movements showed the kind of training that came from facing real danger. The transport has arrived, Professor Kethril announced unnecessarily. Everyone in the room could hear the heavy footsteps and shouted commands coming from the hallway outside. Please remain calm and remember that you are completely safe. The classroom door opened, and 3 peacekeepers entered first. They were members of different species, but all carried themselves with the same professional alertness. Their eyes swept the room, checking exits and positions before nodding to someone outside. What came through the door next made several students gasp in terror. The containment unit was a cylinder of transparent energy fields, humming with power. Inside stood Vextar, and he was everything the students had feared and more. The saurian towered 8 feet tall, his scaled hide a mottled pattern of dark green and black that seemed to shift in the light. His arms were long and powerful, ending in hands that bore claws as long as kitchen knives. But it was his head that truly terrified the watching students. Vextar's skull was elongated and predatory, filled with rows of sharp teeth that were clearly visible when he opened his mouth. His eyes were the worst part, yellow with vertical pupils that tracked across the room like targeting systems, cataloging every movement and filing away information about potential prey. The containment unit was guided to the center of the room by the peacekeepers, who maintained careful distances even from the energy barriers. Additional restraints were visible inside the cylinder, metal bands around Vextar's wrists and ankles that glowed with their own energy patterns. Students, meet Vextar of the Saurian hunting clans, Professor Kethril said, his voice steady despite the palpable fear in the room. He has agreed to participate in today's educational demonstration. Vexstar's head turned toward the professor's voice, and when he spoke, his words came out as a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. Agreed is not the word I would use, Crystal Face. Vexstar said, his pronunciation careful but tinged with menace. Your peacekeepers made me an offer I could not refuse. Freedom in exchange for cooperation. The students pressed back in their seats as Vexstar's gaze swept across them. Several Karate had gone completely still, their natural camouflage trying desperately to make them invisible. The Verdani students were now a sickly brown color, while the aquatic cetaceans had submerged as deeply as possible in their water channels. Do not let the barriers fool you, little prey, Vexstar continued, apparently enjoying the effect he was having. I can smell your fear from here. Each of you has a different scent, but fear tastes the same across all species. One of the peacekeepers stepped forward. The prisoner will limit his comments to answering questions about saurian hunting behaviors and social structures. Vexstar laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Prisoner, yes, but still a hunter. I see how each of you would run when the barriers fail. You, he pointed a clawed finger at a trembling Verdani student, would try to climb. Useless. You, the claw swung toward Karate, would freeze and hope not to be seen. Also useless. His yellow eyes continued their survey of the room until they reached the back row where Jake sat. Unlike every other student, Jake was not pressed back in his seat or showing obvious signs of fear. He was leaning forward slightly, watching Vexstar with what looked like curiosity rather than terror. The saurian's head tilted, confused by this unexpected reaction. And you, soft skin, you do not smell of fear. Why? Jake considered the question seriously. You're contained and surrounded by armed guards. There's no immediate threat. Immediate threat? Vexstar repeated, seeming to taste the words. You think like prey that has survived predators before. What world did you crawl from? Earth, Jake answered simply. Several students turned to look at him in surprise. Most had assumed he was from one of the peaceful colony worlds where humans had begun to settle. Earth itself was largely considered a mythical nightmare world that no civilized being would actually visit. Vexstar's eyes narrowed with interest. Earth. I have heard stories. They say it is a world of predators where even the plants try to kill you. Some of them do, Jake agreed, but you learn to watch out for them. The exchange had caught Professor Kethel's attention as well. He watched with growing fascination as his human student calmly discussed deadly flora with a creature that could tear most beings apart with his bare claws. Perhaps, the professor interrupted, we should begin with some basic questions about saurian social structure and hunting patterns. But Vexstar was no longer interested in the lesson plan. His predator instincts had found something unusual in the room, something that did not react like normal prey. His yellow eyes remained fixed on Jake Morrison, trying to solve a puzzle that his millions of years of evolutionary programming could not quite categorize. The other students remained frozen in terror, unaware that they were witnessing the first meeting between two very different types of predator. Professor Kethel began his lesson, trying to restore some normalcy to the terrifying situation. He activated his teaching displays and started explaining saurian hunting patterns. Charts and diagrams appeared in the air, showing pack formations and territorial behaviors. But everyone's attention remained fixed on the real predator, standing in their classroom. Saurians are persistence hunters, the professor explained, his voice slightly strained. They can track prey across vast distances, using their enhanced senses to follow scent trails that are days old. Vexstar nodded approvingly. Your scent tells me everything, little teacher. You ate fish for breakfast. You are afraid, but trying to hide it, and you have not made it in many cycles. Several students made shocked sounds at this crude observation. Professor Kethrel's crystalline features flushed with embarrassment, but he continued with the lesson. Saurians also hunt in coordinated groups, he said, bringing up new displays. They use complex communication methods to surround and isolate their prey. We do not just hunt, Vexstar interrupted, his yellow eyes gleaming. We enjoy the hunt. The fear of prey makes the meat taste better. The longer the chase, the sweeter the kill. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Students huddled closer together, their various species flight responses activating simultaneously. The Kairati began making high-pitched distress calls, while the Verdani released chemical signals that smelled like rotting vegetation. That will be enough commentary from the specimen. One of the peacekeepers said firmly, "Stick to answering direct questions." Vextar's laugh was like gravel in a blender. "Specimen, I am Vextar of the Bloodclaw clan. I have killed more prey than you have seen sunrises, peacekeeper." As if responding to the rising tension in the room, the Academy's power grid flickered. The lights dimmed for a moment, and several electronic systems made warning sounds. It was a minor fluctuation, the kind that happened occasionally in any large building. But for the containment system holding Vextar, that moment was enough. The energy barriers around the Saurian wavered and disappeared completely for exactly 3 seconds. The backup systems kicked in almost immediately, but 3 seconds was an eternity for a creature that could strike faster than most beings could think. Vextar moved like liquid lightning. The metal restraints on his wrists and ankles, designed to contain him if the energy fields failed, simply snapped apart like toy jewelry. His claws extended to their full length as he lunged toward the nearest peacekeeper. The guard never had a chance to draw his weapon. Vextar's claws raked across the alien's chest, sending him crashing into the wall with a spray of strange-colored blood. The other 2 peacekeepers raised their weapons, but the Saurian was already moving. Chaos erupted in the classroom. Students screamed and fled toward the exits, trampling over chairs and equipment in their panic. The Verdani students released panic pheromones that made the air thick and choking. Cetaceans thrashed in their water channels, trying to find somewhere to hide. But Vextar was not interested in escape. His predatory instincts had taken complete control, and he was hunting. He moved through the fleeing students like a shark through a school of fish, not attacking but hurting them. His tactical mind was working even in his blood frenzy, separating the weak from the strong, identifying the easiest targets. The peacekeeper's stun weapons fired repeatedly, but Vextar seemed impossible to hit. He flowed between the energy bolts like smoke, using overturned furniture and panicking students as cover. His movements were graceful and deadly, every step calculated for maximum efficiency. "Everyone out!" Professor Kethel shouted, but his words were lost in the screaming. He was trying to reach the emergency alert system, but Vextar had positioned himself between the teacher and the controls. 3 karate students had been cut off from the main exits and were trapped in the back corner of the room. Their natural camouflage was useless against a predator who hunted by scent and heat signatures. They huddled together, their clicking sounds now high-pitched with terror. Vextar approached them slowly, savoring their fear. His claws scraped against the floor as he walked, leaving deep gouges in the supposedly indestructible material. His yellow eyes were fixed on the karate, and his tongue flicked out to taste the air. "So much fear," he growled, his voice thick with pleasure. "I had forgotten how good it smells. Your peaceful academy has made me soft, but now I remember what it means to be a hunter." The peacekeepers tried to circle around him, but Vextar was too experienced a fighter to be caught in such an obvious trap. He kept the trapped students between himself and the guards, using them as living shields. "Do not move," he told the Kairati, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the room. "Running will only make this more enjoyable for me. I promise to make it quick if you stay still." One of the Kairati students, barely more than a child, began to sob. The sound seemed to drive Vextar into an even greater frenzy. His muscles bunched as he prepared to pounce, claws extended and jaws opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. The entire classroom held its breath. Even the fleeing students near the exit stopped to watch in horror as the nightmare they had all feared was about to become reality. Professor Kethel reached for his emergency communicator, knowing he would be too late. The peacekeepers adjusted their aim, knowing they might hit the students they were trying to save. The trapped Kairati closed their eyes and waited for death. Vextar launched himself forward with lethal grace, 8 feet of pure predator moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. And then Jake Morrison stepped directly into his path. The human had moved so quietly that no one had noticed him leaving his seat. While everyone else fled toward the exits or froze in terror, Jake had calmly walked to the back of the room. Now he stood between the Saurian and his intended victims, his hands empty and his expression calm. "No," Jake said simply. Vex Star's charge faltered in confusion. Prey did not behave this way. Prey did not step toward danger. Prey did not speak with such quiet authority. For the first time since breaking free, the Saurian hesitated. Vex Star stared at the human who had stepped into his path. This was wrong. This went against every instinct the Saurian had developed over millions of years of evolution. Prey did not move toward predators. Prey did not stand calmly in the face of death. Prey certainly did not look at an 8-foot killing machine with what appeared to be mild interest. "Move aside, soft-skin," Vex Star growled, his claws flexing. "You are not my target." Jake looked over his shoulder at the 3 karate students huddled behind him. They were shaking with terror, their compound eyes wide with disbelief that anyone would try to protect them from a Saurian hunter. "They're just kids," Jake said, turning back to face Vextar. "Find someone else to bother." The casual dismissal hit Vextar like a physical blow. No one had ever called him a bother before. He was death incarnate, a perfect killing machine shaped by evolution to be the ultimate predator. Yet this small, soft creature was treating him like a mild annoyance. "I am Vextar of the Bloodclaw clan," the Saurian roared. "I have killed hundreds. I am the nightmare that haunts the dreams of a dozen worlds." Jake shrugged. "Good for you. Still not happening." Something snapped inside Vextar's mind. His hunting instincts screamed at him to tear this insolent prey apart. He launched himself at Jake with all the speed and fury that had made him legend among his people. What happened next defied every law of physics and biology that the watching students thought they understood. Jake moved. He did not scramble or stumble like panic prey. He did not throw himself aside in desperate flight. Instead, he stepped forward to meet Vextar's charge with the fluid grace of water flowing around a stone. As the Saurian's claws swept toward him, Jake simply was not there anymore. Vextar's momentum carried him past a human and into the wall behind where Jake had been standing. The impact cracked the supposedly indestructible material and sent vibrations through the entire building. The Saurian recovered quickly, spinning around with snarl of rage. But Jake was already moving again, circling to keep himself between Vextar and the karate students. The human's movements were economical and precise, like a dancer who had practiced the same routine for years. "Impossible," Vextar hissed. "No prey moves like that." "I'm not prey," Jake said calmly. The words hit the classroom like a lightning bolt. Students who had been fleeing toward the exit stopped and turned back. Professor Kethril lowered his emergency communicator, his crystalline features reflecting amazement and growing horror. Vextar attacked again, this time more carefully. He feinted left, then struck right with claws that could tear through steel plating. Jake read the movement before it began, stepping into the feint and using Vextar's own momentum to redirect the attack harmlessly past him. The Saurian stumbled, off balance from hitting nothing but air. Jake's hand shot out and struck him in the side with surgical precision. The blow looked gentle, almost casual, but Vextar gasped and staggered as if he'd been hit by a transport vehicle. "What are you?" Vextar wheezed, his yellow eyes wide with confusion, and the first hint of something he had rarely felt in his life, fear. Jake did not answer with words. Instead, he moved forward with the same calm efficiency he had shown throughout the fight. Vextar tried to back away, but found himself trapped against the damaged wall. The Saurian lashed out with both claws, a killing strike that should have shredded any opponent. Jake caught both of Vextar's wrists in his hands and held them motionless. The Saurian was 8 feet tall and weighed over 400 pounds. His muscles were designed for tearing apart prey and crushing bones. Yet his claws stopped as if they had hit an invisible wall. "This is not possible," Vextar gasped, straining against Jake's grip. "You are soft. You are weak. You are prey." Jake's grip tightened slightly, and Vextar cried out in pain. The sound was shocking to everyone in the room. None of them had ever heard a Saurian make a sound of distress. "I'm human," Jake said quietly. "We're different." With movements that looked almost gentle, Jake shifted his grip and applied pressure to specific points on Vextar's arms. The saurian's claws retracted involuntarily as his muscles spasmed. Jake stepped closer, his face calm and focused. "This is called a blood choke," Jake explained, as if he were giving a lesson. "It cuts off blood flow to the brain. You'll be unconscious in about 15 seconds. Vextar tried to break free, but his movements were becoming sluggish. His yellow eyes, which had been filled with predatory confidence, now showed panic and disbelief. "You cannot be prey," he whispered. "Prey does not move like water. Prey does not strike like lightning. Prey does not speak of death as if it were nothing." Jake's hold tightened with mechanical precision. "We're not prey. We never were." The saurian's struggles grew weaker. His eyes began to roll back as the blood flow to his brain was cut off. Around the classroom, students and faculty watched in stunned silence as their quiet human classmates systematically subdued one of the galaxy's most feared predators. 12 seconds, Jake said calmly, as if counting down to a routine event. Vextar's massive form went limp. The feared hunter of the Bloodclaw clan collapsed to the floor like a discarded toy, unconscious but still breathing. Jake released his hold and stepped back, checking his watch as if timing the technique for future reference. The classroom was completely silent except for the sound of Jake's normal breathing. He had just defeated an apex predator in hand-to-hand combat, and he was not even breathing hard. Jake turned to check on the karate students, who were staring at him with expressions of absolute terror. Not terror of the saurian anymore, but terror of him. "Are you guys okay?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. One of the karate managed to nod, though her entire body was trembling. Jake smiled and gave her what he probably thought was a reassuring pat on the shoulder. She nearly fainted at his touch. Professor Kethel approached slowly, his legs unsteady. The peacekeepers who had been trying to stop Vextar now had their weapons trained on Jake, though they seemed uncertain about whether he was a threat or their savior. "What are you?" the professor whispered, echoing Vextar's question. Jake looked around the room at all the frightened faces staring at him. For the first time, he seemed to realize that something unusual had happened. "I'm just a college student," he said, confusion clear in his voice. "I study literature and poetry." The answer was somehow more terrifying than anything Vextar had said. The medical team arrived within minutes, rushing into the classroom with emergency equipment and stretchers. They stopped short when they saw Vextar lying unconscious on the floor, his massive form completely still. One of the medics, a tall blue-skinned Aquarian, scanned the saurian with a handheld device. Multiple bruised ribs, strained muscles in both arms, and signs of oxygen deprivation to the brain, the medic reported. What kind of weapon was used on him? All eyes turned to Jake, who was sitting quietly in his chair and organizing his study materials as if nothing unusual had happened. He looked up when he realized everyone was staring at him. "I didn't use any weapons," Jake said. "I just held him until he went to sleep." The medic scanner beeped frantically as he checked the readings again. These injuries suggest he was struck by something with tremendous force. The precision of the damage indicates advanced combat training. Jake frowned. "I took karate classes when I was 7. My mom thought it would help with my coordination." Professor Kethel felt his crystalline legs becoming unsteady. "You learned to fight as a child?" "Not really fight," Jake explained. "More like basic self-defense and exercise. We did it twice a week after school. There was juice and cookies afterward." The casual way Jake described learning combat techniques as a childhood activity sent chills through everyone present. On most worlds, violence was so rare that many species had no concept of organized fighting. The idea that human children were taught combat as a recreational activity was horrifying. Zara, one of the Verdani students, pulled out her data tablet with shaking hands. Her plant-like features had turned a sickly gray color as she began searching for information about Earth and humans. "Look at this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Other students gathered around her tablet, and what they saw made them step back in horror. The search results showed Earth's classification as a Class 7 Deathworld, with warnings in multiple galactic languages about the extreme dangers of the planet. "Gravity twice that of most habitable worlds," one student read aloud. "Atmospheric oxygen levels that would be toxic to many species. weather systems capable of destroying entire cities, predatory species in every ecosystem. Another student found a report from the first galactic survey team that had visited Earth. They list over 3,000 species of predators, including some that hunt in organized groups: flying predators, swimming predators, underground predators, and something called persistence hunters that can track prey for days without stopping. The room grew quieter as more information appeared on their screens. Images of Earth's wildlife filled their tablets. Massive predators with crushing jaws, venomous creatures that could kill with single bite, and pack hunters that work together to bring down prey many times their size. But humans conquered this world. Professor Kethrel said slowly, the implications beginning to sink in. They did not just survive there. They dominated it completely. Jake looked up from his notes, confused by the growing fear in the room. Earth's not that bad once you learn what to watch out for. Most of the dangerous stuff tries to avoid people anyway. Most of it, squeaked one of the karate students. Well, there's sharks, bears, big cats, wolves, venomous snakes, poisonous spiders, crocodiles, and a few others, Jake said, counting on his fingers. But they usually only attack if you surprise them or threaten their babies. Common sense stuff. The list of casual death that Jake rattled off made several students feel sick. On their worlds, a single predator species was cause for extreme caution. The idea of a planet filled with dozens of different ways to die was beyond their comprehension. A cetacean student found a historical database about human warfare. It says here that humans have fought wars involving millions of participants. Some conflicts lasted for years and covered entire continents. Jake nodded. Yeah, we learned about those in history class. Pretty awful stuff. That's why we try to get along better now. You study warfare in school? Professor Kethrel asked, his voice faint. Just the historical aspects. Jake explained. You know, causes and effects, political implications, that kind of thing. It's important to understand the past, so we don't repeat the same mistakes. The casualness with which Jake discussed mass violence was perhaps the most terrifying thing yet. He spoke about war and death the way other species might discuss weather patterns or crop yields. More search results appeared on the students' tablets. They found information about human sports, and the images made them gasp in horror. Humans deliberately crashed into each other at high speeds, hit each other with sticks while chasing a small object, and threw each other to the ground for entertainment. This cannot be real, whispered one of the Verdani students. These images show humans voluntarily injuring each other. Jake glanced at the screen and smiled. Oh, that's just football and hockey. They're fun to watch. I played soccer in high school. Soccer? Professor Kethrel asked weakly. You run around trying to kick a ball into a goal while other people try to stop you, Jake explained. It's good exercise, and the teamwork aspects are really interesting. Even this supposedly peaceful sport sounded violent to ears accustomed to truly peaceful activities. The idea of deliberately trying to stop someone from achieving their goal was foreign to most galactic species. One student found a report about human dietary habits, and the discovery sent shockwaves through the group. They consume the flesh of other living creatures. The student read in horror. They deliberately kill animals for food. Humans are omnivores, Jay confirmed. We eat both plants and meat. Balanced nutrition is important for proper development. The room fell completely silent. Most galactic species were herbivores, filter feeders, or absorbed nutrients directly from their environment. The concept of deliberately killing other life forms for sustenance was nightmare fuel for civilized beings. You kill to eat? One of the karate asked, her compound eyes wide with terror. Jake realized he had said something wrong, but wasn't sure what. Well, not personally. Most people buy their food from stores. But yeah, humans eat meat. We also eat vegetables, fruits, grains, that kind of thing. The explanation did nothing to comfort anyone. The image of humans as creatures that casually consume the flesh of other beings while studying poetry and literature was impossible to reconcile. Professor Kethrel sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the revelations. He had spent over 2 centuries studying dangerous species, but he was beginning to realize that he had never encountered anything like humanity. What kind of species are you? He whispered. Jake looked around the room, at all the terrified faces staring at him. For the first time, he seemed to understand that his presence was causing genuine fear. "We're just people," he said quietly. "We're trying to be better than we used to be." Somehow, that answer was the most terrifying of all. The medical team finally managed to load the unconscious Vextar onto a stretcher and wheel him out of the classroom. The Saurian would spend the next several weeks in the medical bay, recovering from injuries that should have required heavy weapons to inflict. As the door closed behind them, Professor Kethril canceled the rest of the day's classes. But none of the students left. They remained in their seats, staring at Jake with a mixture of fascination and terror. The human had returned to reading his poetry textbook, apparently unaware of the crisis of understanding he had created in every mind present. "Jake," Professor Kethril said carefully, "may I ask you some questions?" Jake looked up from his book, marking his place with a finger. "Sure, Professor. What do you want to know?" "How did you learn to fight like that?" Jake considered the question seriously. "I guess it started with karate when I was little. Then I did wrestling in middle school, some boxing in high school, and I took a few mixed martial arts classes in college. Nothing too serious." The list of combat training that Jake considered nothing serious made several students feel dizzy. On their worlds, learning even basic self-defense was unusual. The idea of studying multiple fighting styles as a normal part of growing up was incomprehensible. "Why did you learn so many different fighting methods?" asked Zara, her plant-like features still showing distress colors. "My parents thought it was important," Jake explained. "Physical fitness, discipline, confidence building. Plus it's fun to learn new things. Each style has different philosophies and techniques." "Fun," whispered one of the karate students. Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, it's like solving puzzles with your body. How do you counter this attack? What's the best response to that situation?" Their strategy involved not just physical movement. The idea that combat was an intellectual exercise, as well as a physical one, was a new level of horror for his listeners. They were beginning to understand that humans did not just fight by instinct or desperation. They approached violence with the same analytical thinking they applied to science or art. "When you stepped in front of Vextar," Professor Kethril continued, "were you not afraid?" Jake thought about this for a moment. "I was concerned," he admitted, "but he was contained and outnumbered. The situation was manageable." "Manageable?" Professor Kethril repeated faintly. "Well, he's big and strong, but he was also emotional and unfocused," Jake explained. "Anger makes you sloppy. I could see his attacks coming before he made them. Plus, the room layout gave me good positioning options." The casual tactical analysis made everyone realize that Jake had not been lucky or brave. He had been calculating. While they saw an unstoppable monster, Jake had seen a problem to be solved, complete with advantages and disadvantages to exploit. "Have you ever been in real danger before?" asked one of the cetacean students. Jake laughed, not realizing how the sound made everyone flinch. "Sure, lots of times. I grew up in Detroit. You learn to pay attention to your surroundings." The students quickly searched for information about Detroit and found crime statistics that made their blood run cold. Murder rates, assault statistics, and reports of violence that would have shut down entire sectors on their worlds were just part of daily life in Jake's hometown. "You lived in a place where people hurt each other regularly?" Zara asked in horror. "It wasn't that bad," Jake said defensively. "Most neighborhoods were perfectly safe if you use common sense. Don't walk alone at night in certain areas. Stay aware of who's around you. Avoid people who seem unstable. Basic precautions." What Jake described as basic precautions sounded like military survival training to his listeners. The idea of children learning to assess threats and avoid danger as part of growing up was beyond their understanding. "But why did you help us?" asked one of the karate students, her voice barely audible. "You could have escaped like everyone else." Jake looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because you needed help and I could help you. That's what you do." "That's what humans do?" Professor Kethril asked. "That's what people do," Jake corrected. "When someone's in trouble, you help them if you can. It doesn't matter if they're strangers or different species. They were scared, and I could do something about it. The simple morality of Jake's statement was perhaps the most alien thing yet. Most species would help members of their own kind, and some might help allies or trading partners. But the idea of risking personal safety for complete strangers from other worlds was unthinkable. Even though it was dangerous? Pressed Professor Ketherill. Jake shrugged. Everything's dangerous if you think about it too much. You could trip walking to class, choke on your food, or get struck by lightning. Can't let fear stop you from doing the right thing. The casual acceptance of ever-present danger was chilling to species that had evolved on safe worlds. They were beginning to understand that humans did not just survive on a dangerous planet. They had internalized that danger until it became part of their basic worldview. What would have happened if you had lost a fight? Asked Zara. Jake considered this seriously. Then those three would probably be dead, and I'd be dead too. But at least I would have tried to help them. Sometimes that's all you can do. The matter-of-fact way Jake discussed his own potential death made several students feel sick. He spoke about dying the way they might discuss missing a meal or failing a test, an unpleasant possibility, but not something worth dwelling on. Are all humans like you? Professor Ketherill asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. Jake laughed again, still not understanding why the sound made everyone nervous. I'm pretty average. Most of my friends back home are stronger or faster or smarter than me. I'm just a literature student who reads too much poetry. The revelation that Jake considered himself ordinary was the final blow to their understanding of a universe. If this creature who could defeat apex predators barehanded while discussing the philosophical implications of violence was average, what did that say about the rest of humanity? Professor Ketherill looked around at his traumatized students and realized that his entire course curriculum would need to be rewritten. Everything they thought they knew about predators and prey had been turned upside down by one quiet human who just wanted to help people. I think, he said slowly, we need to reconsider our definition of what makes a species dangerous. Jake finally seemed to notice the fear in the room. Are you guys okay? You all look upset about something. The innocent concern in his voice was somehow the most terrifying thing of all. News of the incident spread through Zenith Galactic Academy like wildfire. By the next morning, every student and faculty member had heard some version of a story. The human who defeated a saurian hunter. The Deathworlder who moved like liquid lightning. The poetry student who spoke of violence as casually as others discuss the weather. Jake found himself at the center of attention he had never wanted. Some students now gave him an even wider berth than before, crossing to the other side of hallways when they saw him coming. Others stared at him with fascination, as if trying to understand how something so dangerous could look so ordinary. But the three Kairati students he had saved reacted differently. They began following him around campus, staying close enough to feel safe, but far enough away to avoid startling him. When other students asked why, one of them explained simply, "He protected us. Now we stay near our protector." The idea of voluntarily staying close to something as dangerous as a human baffled most other species. But the Kairati understood something the others did not. Jake had chosen to protect them when he could have chosen to let them die. That choice meant everything. Professor Ketherill spent 3 days rewriting his entire course curriculum. The lesson about predators had been replaced with a new focus. The difference between creatures that were dangerous and creatures that chose when to be dangerous. Vextar represented what we traditionally think of as a predator, he told his much smaller class when they reconvened. Many students had dropped the course after the incident. He was driven by instinct, emotion, and biological programming. His violence was predictable because it followed natural patterns. Jake sat in his usual spot in the back row, taking notes and looking slightly embarrassed by all the attention. He had asked Professor Ketherill to stop using him as an example, but the professor explained that understanding humanity was now crucial for galactic relations. But humans represent something far more complex. Professor Ketherill continued. They are apex predators who have evolved beyond pure instinct. They can choose when to be violent and when to be peaceful. This makes them simultaneously more dangerous and safer than traditional predators. Zara, one of the few Verdani students who had remained in class, raised a trembling leaf hand. How can something be more dangerous and safer at the same time? Professor Ketherill activated a holographic display showing Earth's history. Because humans have a capacity for both creation and destruction on a scale that staggers imagination. They can write poetry about love and beauty, then develop weapons capable of destroying entire planets. They can risk their lives to save strangers, then wage wars that last for generations. The display showed images of human achievements alongside human conflicts. Beautiful art next to devastating battlefields. Magnificent cities next to scenes of destruction. Acts of incredible kindness next to examples of terrible cruelty. The key factor, Professor Kettle explained, is choice. Vextar had no choice in his violence. It was simply his nature. But humans choose every moment whether to create or destroy, to help or harm, to build up or tear down. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had never thought of himself or his species in such dramatic terms. To him, humans were just people trying to do their best in a complicated universe. This is why, Professor Kettle continued, humanity may be the most significant species to join the Galactic Federation in centuries. They bring capabilities we have never seen before, tempered by moral frameworks that guide how those capabilities are used. After class, several students approached Jake with questions. They seemed less afraid now, though still obviously nervous. The Kairati students remained close by, appointed themselves as unofficial guards. Jake asked one of the cetacean students, "What do you want to do after you graduate?" Jake smiled, not noticing how the expression made several students step back. "I want to be a teacher. Maybe work with children from different worlds. Help them understand each other better. I think education is the key to preventing conflicts." The idea that something capable of such violence wanted to work with children was initially terrifying. But as the students thought about it, they began to understand something profound. Jake did not see violence as his primary tool. He saw it as a last resort when education and understanding failed. "Do you think humans and other species can really get along?" asked Zara. Jake considered the question seriously. "I think we have to try. The universe is big enough for everyone if we're willing to work together, but it requires effort from all sides." Professor Kethel watched from his office window as Jake sat in the academy gardens, helping Zara with her mathematics homework while the 3 Kairati students sat nearby, content to be close to their protector. The scene perfectly captured the contradiction that was humanity. Hands that could kill with precision, gently guiding a struggling student through complex equations. He updated his final report on the incident, writing carefully chosen words that would be read by officials throughout the Galactic Federation. His conclusion was simple but profound. Humans represent a new paradigm in galactic relations. They are not merely dangerous or peaceful. They are dangerous beings who have chosen to be civilized. This choice, he continued, makes them potentially the most valuable allies or the most terrifying enemies the galaxy has ever known. Our response to humanity will likely determine which of these they become. As Jake helped Zara solve another equation, laughing at her small joke about mathematical symbols, Professor Kethel realized that the future galactic peace might rest on understanding this simple truth. The most dangerous beings in the universe were often those who chose not to use their full potential for destruction. The academy gardens were peaceful in the afternoon sun. Students from dozens of worlds studied together, played games, and shared knowledge. At the center of it all sat a human from Detroit, quietly helping others learn, while 3 insectoid aliens kept watch over him. It was, Professor Kethel thought, perhaps the most hopeful sight he had seen in his 2 centuries of life. The Predator had become the protector, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the distance, construction crews were already working to repair the damage Vextar had caused the classroom. But the changes Jake Morrison had brought to their understanding of a universe would take much longer to rebuild. Some changes, Professor Kethel realized, were worth making,